There's a tablet in the basement of the Ashmolean Museum that most visitors walk past without a second glance. It's a clay prism, roughly the size of a shoebox, covered in the tiny wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform script. Catalogued as WB44, the Weld-Blundell Prism, it was inscribed around 1817 BC in what is now Iraq. What makes this unremarkable object extraordinary is what it claims. It lists kings who supposedly ruled for 43 to 200 years. Not metaphorically. The scribes who carved these symbols into wet clay weren't writing poetry, they were keeping records, or at least they believed they were. When German archaeologist Hermann Hilprecht first published fragments of this list in 1906, he assumed he'd found mythology dressed up as history. But here's what makes scholars uncomfortable. The same list that describes these impossibly long reigns also accurately records kings we've verified through independent archaeological evidence. The scribes who documented the mythical are the same, ones who documented the real. They used the same clay, the same script, the same bureaucratic precision for both. So tonight, as the weight of the day begins to lift and your thoughts start to drift, I want to take you somewhere quiet, somewhere the questions are bigger than the answers. We're going to explore a possibility that exists in the shadows between ancient history and modern speculation. What if the beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, those who supposedly came from the heavens to create humanity, never actually left? Close your eyes if you'd like. You won't need visuals for this journey. Let the story unfold at its own pace. The world I'm building exists better in shadow, in the space between memory and history. Before we go deeper, if this resonates with you, a quiet like helps others find these stories. I'm curious, where in the world are you drifting off from tonight? What time is it there? Leave a gentle comment below, and remember, there are more mysteries waiting in the playlist whenever you're ready. Now, let's begin. The question we're really asking tonight isn't just whether advanced beings visited Earth in the distant past. That theory, popularized by writers like Erich von Däniken in his 68 book Chariots of the Gods, and later refined by Zecharia Sitchin in his Earth Chronicles series starting in 1976, has been debated for decades. Sitchin's interpretation of Sumerian texts proposed that extraterrestrial beings called the Anunnaki came to Earth approximately 450,000 years ago from a planet called Nibiru, created humans through genetic engineering to mine gold, and eventually departed. But our question tonight goes deeper. What if they never left? What if the departure was a myth? A convenient cover story? What if the beings who walked among the Sumerians simply stopped walking and started hiding? To understand this possibility, we need to go back to the beginning, back to southern Mesopotamia, to the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where around 4500 BC the world's first known urban civilization emerged, seemingly out of nowhere. The Sumerians were extraordinary by any measure. They invented the first known writing system, cuneiform, around 3200 BC. They created the wheel. They developed sophisticated mathematics using a base 60 system we still use to measure time and angles. They built massive stepped pyramids called ziggurats that dominated their city skylines. They established complex legal codes, created detailed astronomical charts, and laid the foundations for virtually every subsequent civilization in the ancient Near East. Mainstream archaeology explains this as the natural evolution of human society. Hunter-gatherers settled, agriculture developed, surplus food led to specialization, and civilization emerged. It's a neat progression, but it happened remarkably fast. The jump from primitive agricultural communities to sophisticated city-states with writing, law, astronomy, and monumental architecture occurred in the span of perhaps 1,000 years. In their own texts, the Sumerians offered a different explanation. They said kingship descended from heaven. They said the Anunnaki brought civilization. The word Anunnaki appears throughout Mesopotamian literature. In Sumerian, the name derives from An, the sky god, and is generally translated by mainstream scholars as princely offspring or those of royal blood. These were the children of An, the sky god, and Ki, the earth goddess. The scholarly consensus holds that the Anunnaki were simply the principal deities of the Sumerian pantheon, gods who decreed the fates of humanity and later, in Babylonian texts, became associated with the underworld as judges of the dead. But here's where the modern interpretation diverges sharply from academic consensus. Zecharia Sitchin, born in Russia and educated in Palestine and London with a degree in economic history, taught himself to read cuneiform. In the 12th of Thothpo 1712th Planet, published in 1976, he proposed a radical reinterpretation. Sitchin argued that the Sumerian texts weren't mythology at all. They were literal historical accounts. The Anunnaki weren't gods in a spiritual sense. They were physical beings, an advanced extraterrestrial species from a planet called Nibiru that allegedly orbits our sun on a 600-year elliptical path. According to Sitchin's interpretation of these texts, the beings came to Earth because Nibiru's atmosphere was deteriorating. In his reading, they needed gold, vast quantities of it, to suspend as fine particles in their upper atmosphere to create a reflective shield. Earth was rich in gold. So, Sitchin argued, they came here, established mining operations in Southeast Africa, and initially used their own people as labourers, but the work was brutal. The Igigi, which Sitchin interpreted as the worker-class Anunnaki, eventually rebelled. Sitchin pointed to the Mesopotamian text called the Atrahasis, which mainstreamed our scholars date to around 1700 BC as evidence. In this text, the lesser gods do indeed revolt against their endless toil. The solution proposed by Enki, the god of wisdom and water, was to create a new species. In Sitchin's reading, this meant a primitive worker, a being intelligent enough to follow instructions but docile enough to serve without question. Sitchin's interpretation was that the Anunnaki engaged in genetic engineering. They took Homo erectus, a hominin species already evolving on Earth, and enhanced it with their own DNA. The result was Homo sapiens, us, created not through gradual evolution or divine benevolence, but through cold, pragmatic bioengineering. We were, in this telling, designed to be a slave species. It must be stated clearly that Sitchin's translations have been thoroughly rejected by every credentialed scholar in Sumerian, Akkadian, and ancient Semitic languages. Dr. Michael Heiser, who holds a PhD in Hebrew and Semitic studies and from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has systematically dismantled Sitchin's work. Heiser points out that ancient Mesopotamians compiled their own dictionaries, bilingual lexicons that we possess today. The words Sitchin claims mean rocket ships or spacecraft have no such meanings in these ancient dictionaries. The Mesopotamian scribes themselves defined their own vocabulary, and those definitions directly contradict Sitchin's translations. When Sitchin translates Anunnaki as those who from heaven to earth came, he's making it up. The scholarly consensus, based on the Sumerians' own linguistic records, translates it as princely seed or royal blood. When he translates the word Shem as sky chamber or rocket, mainstream scholars translate it as name or reputation. The famous cylinder seal VA-243, which Sitchin claimed depicted the solar system with 12 planets including Nibiru, is translated by Assyriologists as a common presentation scene with standard religious symbols, not a more astronomical chart. So why are we still talking about this? If Sitchin's work has been so thoroughly debunked, why does it persist? Why does it resonate? Because the questions it raises touch something deeper than mistranslated cuneiform. The questions are about us, about the strange gaps in our understanding of human origins, about the uncomfortable mysteries that remain even when we strip away the pseudoscience. Consider the Sumerian king list. This is not disputed. We have multiple copies of this text, the most complete being the Weld-Blundell Prism. It was composed during the Earth III period, around 2100 BC, though it describes events supposedly stretching back to the beginning of kingship itself. The list begins with the statement, "After kingship descended from heaven." Then it records 8 kings who ruled before a great flood. Their combined reigns total 241,200 years. After the flood, kingship resumed, and the list continues with more reasonable but still extraordinary reign lengths gradually decreasing until it reaches historically verified rulers. Mainstream scholars view the antediluvian section, the pre-flood kings with their impossibly long reigns, as purely mythological. A later addition to the list by a different scribe meant to give the document a sense of deep antiquity and divine authority. The numbers are symbolic, they argue, not literal. Perhaps they represent dynasties rather than individuals. Perhaps they're simply inflated to convey the grandeur of a mythical golden age. But the list doesn't separate myth from history. There's no disclaimer. The same bureaucratic precision that records a 43 to 200-year reign records a 126-year reign for Gilgamesh, a figure who appears in both epic poetry and, some scholars believe, may have been based on an actual historical king. If Gilgamesh was real, he likely ruled Uruk sometime around 2700 BC, though this remains debated. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest literary works in human history, mentions a king named Enma-Baragesi, who appears in the king list and whose name has been found on archaeological inscriptions at Nippur, suggesting at least some historical basis for the later portions of the list. So the scribes who recorded impossible reigns also recorded real ones. They made no distinction. To them it was all history. What if they had no reason to make a distinction? What if, from their perspective, they were simply recording what they'd been told? The theory that the Anunnaki never left Earth requires us to ask, what would it look like if they stayed? One possibility is physical hiding, underground bases, isolated locations. The Earth is vast, and even today there are places that remain largely unexplored. The deepest parts of the ocean, remote mountain ranges, the interior of Antarctica beneath miles of ice. If a technologically advanced civilization wanted to remain hidden from a species that only developed flight in the last century, it wouldn't be difficult. Some theorists point to ancient texts that describe the Anunnaki as associated with the underworld. In Mesopotamian mythology, particularly in later Babylonian texts, the Anunnaki are frequently depicted as subterranean beings, judges who dwell in the realm beneath the earth. In tablets discovered at Nippur dating to around 2000 BC, the Anunnaki are described as the 7 judges who reside in the underworld with the goddess Ereshkigal. Could this be a cultural memory of beings who literally went underground, who retreated from the surface but remained beneath it? The myth of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text excluded from most biblical canons, describes similar beings. The Watchers were angels who descended to earth, taught forbidden knowledge to humanity and interbred with human women, producing the Nephilim, giants mentioned briefly in Genesis. In the Book of Jude, these beings are described as being kept in everlasting chains under darkness, imprisoned beneath the earth. The Greek Titans, born of the earth goddess Gaia and the sky god Uranus, were also banished to Tartarus, a deep abyss beneath the underworld, after being defeated by the younger Olympian gods. The Hittites and Hurrians, whose civilizations flourished in Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia in the 2nd millennium BC, had myths of former gods who were banished to the underworld by newer deities. Hittite texts explicitly identify these former gods with the Anunnaki. There's a pattern across cultures, older gods, former gods, beings who came before, and in many cases they didn't disappear into the heavens, they went down. But there's another possibility, one that doesn't require underground cities or hidden bases. What if they didn't hide physically? What if they simply stopped being visible as themselves? The Anunnaki in Sitchin's narrative and in various modern interpretations were described as humanoid, tall, imposing, long-lived, but fundamentally similar in appearance to humans. If they possessed advanced technology, if they could manipulate genetics, could they not also integrate? Could they not blend? This brings us to one of the more controversial aspects of modern Anunnaki theory, the idea of bloodlines, hybrid lineages, the notion that certain human families carry Anunnaki DNA, that they are descendants of the original genetic experiments or of later interbreeding between Anunnaki and humans. In ancient Mesopotamian texts, there are clear hierarchies. Kings and priests often claim divine ancestry. Gilgamesh was said to be 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. His mother was the goddess Ninsun. This fraction, 2/3, appears elsewhere in Mesopotamian literature as a marker of semi-divine status. It's a specific proportion. Why 2/3? Why not simply half-god? Some speculate it refers to actual genetic ratios, though of course this is pure speculation. The biblical Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, were described as giants and mighty warriors. Genesis 6:4 states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old the men of renown." And also afterward. The text suggests these unions didn't stop with the flood. They continued. If we follow this thread, if we entertain the possibility that a non-human or partially non-human lineage was established in deep antiquity, What would be its purpose? Why maintain it? One theory posits control. If the Anunnaki created humanity for a specific purpose, they would want to ensure that purpose continued. Direct rule became untenable as human populations exploded and spread across the planet. Constant visible oversight would be impossible. But if certain bloodlines carried Anunnaki genetics, if these individuals were predisposed to leadership, to maintaining hierarchical structures, to perpetuating systems that channeled human labour and resources, then control could be maintained indirectly, through us. This is where we enter the realm of modern conspiracy theory. Writers like David Icke have taken the Anunnaki narrative and woven it into broader theories about global elites, secret societies, and shadow governments. Icke notoriously claims that the Anunnaki are reptilian shapeshifters who secretly control the world through royal bloodlines and powerful institutions. His work is widely regarded as pseudoscience and has been criticised for promoting anti-Semitic tropes disguised as alternative history. But strip away the more fantastical elements, the shape-shifting and interdimensional reptilians, and there's a core question that's worth considering. Is the hierarchical structure of human civilization, the way power concentrates in the hands of small groups, the way resources flow upward while labour flows downward, natural? Is it simply an inevitable result of human nature? Or was it designed? The Sumerians themselves described their purpose in texts like the Atrahasis. Humans were created to bear the workload of the gods, to dig irrigation canals, to farm the land, to provide offerings of food, drink, and labour. The Mesopotamian temples functioned as economic centres, massive institutions that controlled vast agricultural lands and workshops. The majority of the population laboured for these temples, which were seen as the literal houses of the gods. In the modern world, we labour for corporations, institutions, governments. We produce far more than we consume. The surplus flows upward to those who control the means of production. We call it capitalism, feudalism, communism, different names for similar structures. Hierarchies where the many work and the few benefit. Is this pattern a human creation? Or was it taught? Programmed? Engineered into us from the beginning? Consider what would be needed to maintain such a system across millennia without visible oversight. You would need ideology, belief systems that justify the hierarchy, religions that preach obedience to authority as a divine command, economic systems that make labour compulsory for survival, educational systems that teach people their place and discourage questioning, media that controls the flow of information. You would need, in short, exactly what we have. The Anunnaki, in this interpretation, don't need to be physically present. They've built a self-sustaining system, a machine that runs on human energy, human creativity, human life, and extracts resources, labour, and obedience. And the machine has operators, people who may or may not know they're playing a role in a plan that predates recorded history. This is, of course, speculative. It's conspiracy thinking at its most elaborate. But it's also a mirror. The theory of hidden Anunnaki control reflects genuine anxieties about power, about the opacity of institutions, about the feeling that the game is rigged and we don't know who's holding the dice. Let's step back. Let's ground ourselves in what we actually know. We know the Sumerians existed. Their cities, their tablets, their cylinder seals, their temples, these are real archaeological facts. We know they had a sophisticated culture that emerged with startling rapidity. We know their myths spoke of gods who came from the sky and shaped humanity. We know myths are never purely fictional. They're cultural memories, encoded in story. The Greek myth of a great flood echoes the biblical flood, which echoes the Mesopotamian flood epic, found in texts like Atrahasis and the Gilgamesh epic. Flood myths appear in hundreds of cultures worldwide. Geologists have found evidence of catastrophic flooding events in various regions at different times. Myths contain kernels of remembered events, distorted through centuries of oral transmission and cultural reinterpretation. We know human civilization has missing chapters. The timeline of human development isn't as smooth as we'd like to think. There are anomalies. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a massive stone temple complex built around 9600 BC by people who were supposedly hunter-gatherers without agriculture or permanent settlements. The precision of ancient Egyptian stonework, the perfect alignment of the Great Pyramid with true north, the astronomical knowledge encoded in ancient structures worldwide. These things don't prove alien intervention, but they prove our ancestors were far more capable than we often give them credit for. We know power has always concentrated. We know hierarchies are ancient. We know the vast majority of humans have always laboured, while a tiny minority have controlled resources and made decisions. This pattern is as old as civilization itself, maybe older. And we know we're not satisfied with the answers we've been given. The neat academic explanations feel incomplete. The official histories have convenient blind spots. When we're told something is settled, when we're told not to ask certain questions, that's often when the questions become most urgent. So what are we really asking when we ask if the Anunnaki are still here? We're asking if we're free. We're asking if human history has been ours, or if we've been following a script written by someone else. We're asking if the systems we live under are natural or imposed. We're asking if the story we've been told about who we are and where we came from is true. And we're asking if there's anyone out there, watching, waiting, still pulling strings. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki Council, a divine assembly where decisions were made. The major deities, including Enlil, the god of air and authority, Enki, the god of wisdom and water, and Ninhursag, the mother goddess, and others, would gather to decree the fates of gods and mortals alike. These weren't solitary, all-powerful deities. They were a bureaucracy, a committee. The texts describe conflicts among them, rivalries, power struggles. In the Atrahasis, Enlil grows furious with the noise of humanity and seeks to destroy the human population through plague, drought, and ultimately a great flood. Enki, who created humans, repeatedly subverts Enlil's plans, warning favoured humans and teaching them survival techniques. When Enlil decrees the flood, Enki secretly warns Atrahasis, instructing him to build a boat and survive. This isn't the behaviour of gods in the way we usually think of them. These are personalities. Individuals with different agendas, different loyalties, different opinions on what to do about the human situation. If we take Sitchin's interpretation seriously, even just as a thought experiment, we're looking at a scenario where multiple factions of Anunnaki existed. Some, like Enki, seem protective of humanity, treating us as their creation with a sense of responsibility or even affection. Others, like Enlil, view humans as a problem to be managed or eliminated. What if both factions are still here? What if there's a hidden conflict playing out, with humanity caught in the middle, largely unaware that we're pieces on a board? This would explain contradictions in human history, the simultaneous advancement and a regression, the way civilizations rise to great heights and then collapse into dark ages, the way knowledge is discovered, lost, rediscovered, lost again, the way humanity seems to oscillate between periods of enlightenment and periods of violence, oppression, and ignorance. One faction pushing us forward, another pulling us back, a tug of war that's been going on for thousands of years. Or perhaps the truth is simpler and stranger. Perhaps there is no active intervention at all anymore. Perhaps the Anunnaki, if they existed, if they came, if they created or influenced us, simply left behind a design that runs on its own. A self-replicating pattern embedded in human psychology, in our social structures, in our very day. We build hierarchies because we were built to build hierarchies. We work because we were designed to work. We look to the sky for answers because somewhere, deep in our genetic memory, we remember that's where they came from. The most compelling part of the Anunnaki theory isn't the gold mining or the genetic engineering or the planet Nibiru. It's the psychological resonance, the feeling it evokes, a sense of something missing, something hidden, a truth just out of reach. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, universal symbols that appear across cultures because they emerge from the collective unconscious of humanity. The wise old man, the great mother, the shadow, the hero's journey. These patterns repeat because they're wired into us. What if the Anunnaki, the idea of creator gods who shaped us and then departed, is another archetype? Not because it's literally true, but because it expresses something true about the human condition. We feel abandoned. We feel created for a purpose we don't fully understand. We sense design in our own existence, but can't see the designer. Every culture has creation myths. Every culture has sky gods. Every culture has stories of a golden age when gods walk the earth, followed by a fall, a separation. The gods depart. Paradise is lost. Humanity is left to figure things out alone. Maybe that's the universal human experience. Not because alien gods literally left, but because consciousness itself is a kind of abandonment. We became aware. We started asking questions, and the universe doesn't answer. The silence is maddening. So we fill it with stories, ancient astronauts, hidden masters, secret knowledge. We create elaborate theories that give shape to the silence, that transform the void into a mystery we might one day solve. And in a way, that's beautiful. It's hopeful. If the Anunnaki are real, if they are still here, if there's a truth being hidden from us, then reality has meaning. There's a reason for the suffering, the inequality, the struggle. We're not alone in a cold, indifferent universe. We're part of something bigger, even if that something is sinister. But what if we are alone? What if there are no hidden gods, no ancient astronauts, no secret bloodlines? What if human history, with all its beauty and horror, is entirely our own creation? That might be more terrifying, because then we can't blame our failures on anyone else. The hierarchies are ours. The wars are ours. The systems that grind people into dust are ours. We built them, we maintain them, and we could change them if we chose to. The Anunnaki theory, for all its strangeness, offers absolution. It wasn't our fault. We were designed this way. Programmed, enslaved from the beginning. We're victims of a cosmic crime committed before history began. But if it's not true, if we're just us, flawed and brilliant and struggling to figure out how to be human, then the responsibility is entirely ours, and so is the potential. The clay tablets of ancient Sumer sit in museums around the world. The Weld-Blundell Prism is in Oxford. Fragments are in Berlin, in Chicago, in Istanbul. Scholars continue to translate them, finding new texts, refining our understanding of Sumerian language and culture. Every few years, a new tablet is published, offering fresh insights into how these ancient people lived and thought. And the question remains, what were they trying to tell us? The mainstream answer is that they were making sense of their world in the only way they knew how, through mythology, through gods and heroes and cosmic battles. Their stories of the Anunnaki were attempts to explain the unexplainable, to give meaning to existence, to establish the authority of their kings and priests. The alternative answer is that they were recording actual events, translated into the language of divinity because they had no other framework. That the Anunnaki were real, that the genetic creation of humanity happened, that the Great Flood was a deliberate act or a consequence of celestial mechanics they understood, but we've forgotten. And the middle ground, the place where perhaps the truth actually lies, is that both might be partially correct, that something happened in the deep past, something extraordinary, and the memory of it was preserved in myth. But the details, the specifics, were lost or distorted or deliberately obscured. What remains is an echo, a shadow of something we can't quite see. If the Anunnaki are still here, they're patient. They've had thousands of years to perfect the art of hiding. Or perhaps they don't hide at all. Perhaps they're in plain sight and we simply don't recognise them because we're looking for something that matches our expectations. We imagine aliens as dramatically other. But what if they look exactly like us? What if they think like us, speak like us, blend seamlessly because they are genetically almost us? The human genome was sequenced in 2001, completing a project that began in 1990. We now have a map of our own DNA, and within it are puzzles that scientists are still working to understand. In 2001, Sitchin pointed to initial reports from the Human Genome Sequencing Consortium that identified genes that appeared difficult to trace in the evolutionary tree. He suggested these might be evidence of genetic tampering. However, mainstream geneticists, including researchers like Steven Salzberg, have thoroughly addressed these apparent anomalies. The explanation involves lateral gene transfer, where genes can jump from bacteria and other microorganisms to more complex organisms over evolutionary time, and gene loss in related species, which can make evolutionary pathways appear discontinuous when they're actually part of natural processes. These aren't alien insertions. They're well understood, if complex aspects of how genomes evolve over billions of years of life on Earth. What would it take to prove the Anunnaki theory? What evidence would be sufficient? We'd need to find Nibiru, the alleged 12th planet on its 3,600-year orbit. Astronomers have searched. The hypothesis that there's a large undiscovered planet in the outer solar system isn't fringe. It's called Planet 9, and serious scientists have proposed its existence based on the orbital peculiarities of distant Kuiper Belt objects. But Planet 9, if it exists, isn't Nibiru. Its proposed orbit is between 10,000 and 20,000 years, not 3,600, and it's not approaching Earth. We'd need to find physical evidence of the Anunnaki themselves, remains, technology, artifacts that are unambiguously non-human, and yet we haven't. Ancient structures are impressive, but they can be explained by human ingenuity and labour. Ancient knowledge of astronomy is sophisticated, but it can be acquired through patient observation over generations. There are no undeniable smoking guns. We'd need to find the mines. Sitchin claimed the Anunnaki mined gold in Southeast Africa. There are ancient mines in South Africa. Some researchers have claimed the Ngwenya mine in Eswatini dates back 43,000 years, though this dating is highly controversial and not accepted by mainstream archaeology. The evidence for such early mining is disputed, and even if early mining occurred, it doesn't prove extraterrestrial involvement. Every piece of evidence has an alternative explanation. Every anomaly can be rationalized. The question becomes one of interpretation. How much anomaly is acceptable before we revise our theories? At what point do we admit the standard model might be incomplete? The absence of proof isn't proof of absence, but it's also not proof of presence. We're left in uncertainty, and perhaps that's exactly where the question is designed to leave us. If you're lying in bed right now listening to this, you're breathing slow and steady, your mind drifting between waking and sleep. You're experiencing something the ancient Sumerians experienced. The same physiological process, the same gradual dissolution of the boundary between conscious thought and dream. They looked up at the same stars we see. They wondered about the same questions. Who made us? Why are we here? Are we alone? Their answer was the Anunnaki, sky gods who descended and shaped the world. Our answer, in the modern age, has become science, natural selection, the Big Bang, cosmic accident. But deep down, we're still asking the same questions, and we're still not entirely satisfied with the answers. The theory that the Anunnaki never left Earth is, at its core, a theory about hidden knowledge. The idea that truth exists but has been deliberately concealed, that there are people or beings who know what really happened and have chosen to keep the rest of us in ignorance. This is the patterns of every conspiracy theory. Secret societies, shadow governments, ancient mysteries. The form changes, but the structure remains the same. They know something we don't, and they're not telling us. Why is this narrative so compelling? Because it transforms our powerlessness into a mystery. If we're struggling, if the world feels unjust, if we can't understand why things are the way they are, it's not because life is random and meaning is hard to find, it's because someone is deliberately hiding the truth from us. If we could just uncover the secret, everything would make sense. It's seductive, and it's dangerous, because it can become a replacement for action. Instead of changing the systems we can see and touch, we chase shadows. We spend our energy on theories instead of solutions. But it's also, perhaps, not entirely wrong. There are secrets. Information is controlled. History is written by victors. Power does concentrate in hidden rooms where decisions are made that affect millions, and those millions are never consulted. The powerful do lie to maintain their power. This is documented fact, not paranoid speculation. So where do we draw the line between healthy skepticism and paranoid fantasy? Between questioning authority and seeing conspiracies everywhere? Maybe the truth is that both exist, real conspiracies, real concentrations of power, real information being deliberately hidden. And also our tendency to see patterns where none exist, to create elaborate explanations for things that are simply complex or random. The Anunnaki theory sits at the intersection. It takes real mysteries, real anomalies in the historical and archaeological record, and weaves them into a grand narrative that explains everything. It's coherent, it's dramatic, it answers deep psychological needs, but it's also unprovable, and that's its genius. You can't falsify it. Any absence of evidence can be explained as further proof of the cover-up. Any debunking can be dismissed as disinformation. The theory becomes unfalsifiable, which means it's not really a theory at all. It's a belief system, and that's fine, as long as we're honest about it. If the story of the Anunnaki helps you make sense of the world, if it provides a framework for thinking about power and history and human nature, there's value in that. Myths have always served that purpose. The question is whether we confuse the myth with literal truth. The ancient Sumerians understood this better than we do. Their gods were real to them. Enlil and Enki and Inanna were forces that shaped the world, but they also knew these gods were representatives of deeper truths. Enlil wasn't just a bearded man in the sky. He was authority, order, the terror of the storm, the necessity of hierarchy. Enki wasn't just a clever god with a fish cloak. He was wisdom, innovation, the life-giving water, the trickster who subverts authority to protect the weak. The gods were both literal and symbolic, and metaphorical. The Sumerians didn't separate those categories the way we do. A god could be a statue in a temple, a force of nature, a principle of cosmic order, and a story told around a fire all at the same time, all equally true. Maybe the Anunnaki are like that, true in some way that doesn't fit our modern categories of literal versus metaphorical, present in a sense that doesn't require them to be physically here, influencing humanity not through direct intervention but through the structures and ideas they left behind, if they were ever here at all. Or maybe they're watching, waiting, hidden in plain sight or buried beneath the earth, or orbiting just beyond our ability to detect. Maybe Nibiru is coming back, maybe the return is imminent, as Sitchin predicted before his death in 2010. Maybe the signs are there for those who know how to read them. Let's explore these possibilities more deeply. Because if we're going to ask the question seriously, if we're going to entertain the possibility that advanced beings who shaped human civilization never actually left, we need to consider what their continued presence would actually look like. The first scenario is the most straightforward. Physical hiding. The Earth is vast. Even in our age of satellites and GPS, there are places that remain largely unexplored, difficult to access, and easy to conceal within. Consider the ocean. We've explored less than 20% of it. The deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, nearly 7 miles down, experience pressures that crush submarines like tin cans. At these depths, life exists in forms we're only beginning to understand. Entire ecosystems clustered around hydrothermal vents, creatures that have never seen sunlight, chemosynthetic processes that defy our understanding of how life works. If a civilization wanted to build bases in the deep ocean, protected by pressure and darkness, we wouldn't know. Our technology simply isn't capable of comprehensive deep ocean surveillance. Antarctica presents another possibility. Beneath the ice sheet, which in some places is nearly 3 miles thick, lie subglacial lakes, mountains, and valleys we've never seen. Lake Vostok, buried beneath more than 2 miles of ice, is the size of Lake Ontario. It's been isolated from the surface for perhaps 15 million years. Russian scientists drilled down to it in 2012, but they've barely scratched the surface of understanding what might exist in these hidden aquatic environments. If structures or bases existed beneath the Antarctic ice, placed there hundreds of thousands of years ago when the continent had a different climate, they could remain perfectly preserved, completely hidden. Remote mountain ranges, particularly in the Himalayas and the Andes, contain regions that have never been thoroughly explored. Valleys accessible only by dangerous climbs or helicopter. Cave systems that extend for miles underground. The largest known cave system in the world, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, has over 400 miles of surveyed passages, and new sections are discovered regularly. That's just one cave system in one relatively well-explored region. Imagine what might exist in less accessible parts of the world. But perhaps physical hiding isn't necessary at all. Perhaps the Anunnaki, if they remain, don't hide in remote locations. Perhaps they hide in plain sight. If the original Anunnaki were humanoid in appearance, as depicted in countless Sumerian artworks and described in texts, and if they possessed the genetic knowledge to create or modify humanity, they would certainly possess the ability to appear fully human. Genetic engineering advanced enough to splice Anunnaki and Homo erectus DNA could easily modify Anunnaki appearance to be indistinguishable from modern humans. Or perhaps no modification was necessary. Perhaps the similarity was always there. After all, if humans are genetically related to the Anunnaki, carrying their DNA from the original creation event, then the two species might look remarkably alike already. The differences might be subtle: longevity, disease resistance, cognitive abilities, but outwardly indistinguishable. This brings us to the bloodline theory, the idea that certain human lineages carry more Anunnaki DNA than others, that the original priest kings, the rulers who claimed divine ancestry, weren't speaking metaphorically. They were descendants of actual Anunnaki human hybrids. Throughout history, royal bloodlines have obsessed over purity, marrying within their own class, often within their own families. The European monarchies, the Egyptian pharaohs, who married siblings to keep the royal line pure, the divine emperors of Japan claiming unbroken descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu. From a genetic perspective, this is bizarre behavior. Inbreeding causes problems, genetic defects, reduced fertility, weaker immune systems, Why would the most powerful families in history consistently engage in a practice that weakens their offspring? One answer is political. Marriages were alliances. Keeping power within the family prevented rival factions from gaining influence. But there's another possible answer. If these bloodlines carried something non-human, something valuable that would be diluted by mixing with the general population, then the obsession with purity makes sense. They weren't just preserving political power, they were preserving a genetic legacy. The royal families of Europe, particularly the Habsburgs, became so inbred that genetic defects became synonymous with their lineage. The famous Habsburg jaw, a severe underbite caused by mandibular prognathism, became a marker of royal blood. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king of Spain, was so severely affected by generations of inbreeding that he was barely functional. He couldn't chew his food properly. He could barely speak. He was infertile, ending the dynasty. Why continue a practice that so clearly caused harm? Perhaps because the alternative, allowing the bloodline to mix with commoners, was seen as even worse, a loss of something essential, something that defined their right to rule. Secret societies present another layer to this theory. Organizations like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, various mystery schools and esoteric orders have existed for centuries, claiming to preserve ancient knowledge. Their rituals often reference building the temple, divine architecture, the great work of transformation. They use symbolism drawn from ancient Egypt, from Mesopotamia, from Kabbalistic Judaism. Are these organizations simply fraternal clubs for ambitious men, as mainstream historians suggest? Or are they repositories of genuine ancient knowledge, passed down through initiatory lineages that stretch back to Sumer? Consider this. The Great Seal of the United States, adopted in 1782, features a pyramid with an all-seeing eye at its apex, as surrounded by the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum. A. New Order of the Ages. The pyramid is unfinished, 13 levels of stone representing the original 13 colonies, but the capstone, the eye, floats separately, disconnected, divine, watching. The imagery is explicitly esoteric. Many of the founding fathers were Freemasons: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock. They were educated men who had access to ancient texts, who studied history and philosophy. They designed a new nation using principles they believed were timeless, principles of law, governance, separation of powers. Where did these ideas come from? The standard answer is classical Greece and Rome, the Enlightenment, natural law theory. But some of these men also studied Hermetic texts, alchemical works, Kabbalistic writings. They were interested in uncovering hidden knowledge, ancient wisdom that predated Christianity. What if that wisdom traced back further than Greece? What if it traced back to Mesopotamia, to Sumer, to knowledge passed down from the Anunnaki themselves? This is where the theory becomes truly labyrinthine. If the Anunnaki never left, if they established bloodlines and secret societies to preserve their knowledge and maintain influence, then human history isn't really human history. It's a managed narrative, a controlled experiment with operators behind the scenes. Every major civilization that rose and fell, every golden age followed by a dark age, every period of enlightenment followed by suppression, would be part of a pattern, a cycle. Humanity allowed to progress to a certain point, then deliberately set back, kept in a specific range of development, advanced enough to be useful, not advanced enough to be threatening. Why would this be necessary? If the Anunnaki created us as workers, as slaves, they would want to maintain that relationship. A slave that becomes too educated, too powerful, too independent stops being useful. They might rebel, they might demand freedom, they might become competition. So, progress has to be managed, allowed in controlled doses. Technological advancement is permitted, but only along certain lines. We develop industrial machinery because it makes us more efficient workers. We develop information technology because it makes us easier to monitor and control. But we don't develop technologies that would genuinely liberate us from the need to work. Those remain perpetually just over the horizon. Free energy, abundance technology, true artificial intelligence that could handle all productive labour, always 10 years away, always just out of reach. Is this conspiracy, or is it simply the nature of capitalist development, where technologies are only pursued if they're profitable, and liberation technology isn't profitable for those in power? Perhaps both. Perhaps the system we call capitalism, this particular arrangement of labour and resources and power, is itself the legacy of the Anunnaki, the perfected form of the ancient Sumerian temple economy. We still labour to produce surplus for an elite class. We've just renamed the players. Instead of priests serving gods, we have executives serving shareholders. The mechanism is the same. But let's ground this in something concrete. Let's look at a specific historical example where the pattern appears clearly. The Library of Alexandria. Founded in the 3rd century BC in Egypt, it became the largest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. Scholars from across the Mediterranean came to study there. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, engineering. The library contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls, lost works of Greek philosophy, Egyptian medical texts, Babylonian astronomical tables. It was a beacon of learning, and then it declined. The library's destruction wasn't a single event, but a gradual process across centuries. It was damaged during Julius Caesar's civil war, when his troops set fire to ships in the harbour, and the fire may have spread to some scrolls. It suffered. During various political upheavals, it declined as the Roman Empire Christianized and pagan learning fell out of favour. By the time Muslim armies conquered Egypt in the 7th century, the library, as an institution, had long since ceased to function. Much of the ancient world's accumulated knowledge was lost in this process. Standard history attributes this to the chaos of war and political change, the natural fragility of papyrus and parchment, and shifting cultural priorities. These are well-documented historical processes. But from a conspiratorial perspective, one could interpret the pattern differently. If you were predisposed to see hidden patterns, you might ask, why does this keep happening? Why do centres of learning burn? Why is knowledge lost? The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, another great medieval library, was destroyed by the Mongols in 1258. They threw so many books into the Tigris that the river ran black with ink. The Aztec codices, the written records of an entire civilization, were systematically destroyed by Spanish conquistadors and Catholic priests. Of the thousands that existed, only a handful survive today. If you wanted to control a population, one of the most effective methods is controlling their access to knowledge. Destroying the past makes people dependent on you to tell them their own history. They can't verify, they can't question, they have to accept what they're told. If the Anunnaki never left, if they wanted to maintain control, they would need to periodically purge human knowledge. Allow civilizations to advance, learn, build, accumulate wisdom, then destroy it. Reset the counter. Start again from a lower baseline. This keeps humanity in a perpetual cycle of rediscovery. We never quite reach the level where we could challenge our creators, because we keep losing what we learned last time. The Dark Ages in Europe, following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, saw literacy plummet. Technologies were lost. Roman concrete, which could set underwater and lasted for centuries, became a lost art. We only figured out how to replicate it in the modern era. Aqueducts crumbled and couldn't be repaired. Roads fell into disrepair. The knowledge of how to build and maintain them had vanished. Why does knowledge, once gained, get lost? Why isn't progress cumulative? Why does humanity keep having to reinvent the wheel? Maybe because someone keeps hiding the wheel. Or maybe because human societies are fragile. They collapse. War destroys infrastructure. Disease kills those who carry knowledge. Climate change displaces populations. Progress is never guaranteed. The default state is chaos. Maintaining civilization requires constant effort, and when that effort fails, everything built on it crumbles. There's no need to invoke hidden gods to explain the Dark Ages. The fall of Rome had clear causes: political instability, economic decline, barbarian invasions, disease. The infrastructure of empire requires maintenance, and when the empire fell, so did the infrastructure. Knowledge persisted in monasteries in the Byzantine Empire, in the Islamic world. It wasn't entirely lost. It just became fragmented, harder to access. But the pattern remains striking. Knowledge emerges. It consolidates. It reaches a peak. Then something happens: war, conquest, fire, deliberate destruction, and much of it vanishes. If you were an outside observer watching human history unfold over millennia, you might notice this rhythm: advance and retreat, progress and collapse. It looks almost cyclical, almost managed, unless it's just entropy. The natural tendency of complex systems to break down over time. Civilizations are complex. Maintaining them requires energy input. When the energy source fails, collapse is inevitable. Nothing mysterious about it. Except that the energy source is humans. We're still here. We still have the same cognitive abilities we had 5,000 years ago. The same capacity for reason, innovation, cooperation. If anything, we have more accumulated knowledge now than ever before, despite the destructions and losses. And yet, we can't seem to break out of certain patterns. We build hierarchies. We concentrate power. We exploit the many for the benefit of the few. We create weapons capable of destroying ourselves. We degrade the environment that sustains us. We know we're doing this. We can see the consequences, but we continue anyway. Why? Is it because we were designed this way, programmed with certain behavioral tendencies that serve the interests of our creators? Or is it simply because we're flawed biological organisms trying to navigate a world far more complex than the African savanna we evolved on? The Anunnaki theory offers an explanation for human behavior that externalizes responsibility. We're not inherently destructive. We were made to be this way. The systems we build that cause suffering aren't our fault. We're following programming written before we even existed as a species. It's absolution, and it's dangerous. Because if we're not responsible for our own behavior, we have no agency to change it. We're victims of cosmic engineering, doomed to play out roles assigned to us by beings we'll never meet. But what if we have more agency than we think? What if the Anunnaki, even if they existed, even if they created us, didn't fully succeed in controlling us? What if the spark of consciousness they gave us, the intelligence they needed us to have to be useful workers, came with unintended consequences? Because intelligence is dangerous. You can't create a being smart enough to follow complex instructions without also creating a being capable of questioning those instructions. You can't make something conscious without risking that it will become conscious of its own condition, aware of its exploitation, capable of imagining alternatives. The texts themselves hint at this. In the Atrahasis epic, the gods create humans to be workers, but humans multiply, they become numerous, and they become loud. Their activity disturbs the gods. The divine plan isn't working as intended. The slaves are getting out of hand. Enlil's solution is extermination. Wipe them out and start over. But Enki, the creator, resists. He's developed what we might call affection for humanity, or perhaps he just doesn't want his experiment terminated. He warns Atrahasis about the coming flood. He gives humans a chance to survive. Why would Enki do this? If humans are just tools, why not let them be destroyed and create a new batch? Maybe because they'd stopped being just tools. They'd become something more, something unexpected, something that even their creators couldn't fully control. The biblical story of Eden echoes this. God creates humans and places them in paradise. They're given one rule: don't eat from the tree of knowledge, but the serpent, often interpreted as a malicious tempter, might actually be offering liberation, knowledge, the ability to distinguish good from evil, consciousness of their own condition, the capacity to question their creator's authority. And what happens when they eat the fruit? They are cast out, expelled from paradise, made to work the land by the sweat of their brow, subjected to pain, suffering, death. But they're also free. They're no longer innocent automatons. They're aware. They can choose. They can rebel. If the Anunnaki created humans and then lost control of their creation, that would explain a lot. It would explain why the texts describe conflicts between gods, why some gods seem protective of humanity while others want us destroyed. It would explain why human history is messy, chaotic, filled with rebellion and revolution and constant struggle against authority. We weren't supposed to be free. But we became free anyway. And if the Anunnaki are still here, if they're still trying to maintain control, they're fighting a losing battle. Because consciousness, once awakened, can't be put back to sleep. Or maybe that's wishful thinking. Maybe we've never been free. Maybe the rebellions and revolutions we're so proud of are just steam releases. Controlled opposition, letting the pressure vent so the system doesn't explode, while ensuring the fundamental structure remains intact. History is full of revolutions that changed who was in power without changing the nature of power itself. The French Revolution replaced a monarchy with an emperor. The Russian Revolution replaced a czar with a party dictatorship. The American Revolution replaced British aristocrats with American aristocrats. The names change. The system persists. Is this because human nature tends toward hierarchy? Or because the hierarchy was built into us from the beginning, and we can't escape it any more than we can escape our need for food and water? The question of nature versus nurture biology versus culture, is central to understanding human behaviour. If our social structures are biological, hardwired through evolution or genetic engineering, they're extremely difficult to change. If they're cultural, learned and transmitted through socialization, they're malleable. We can choose differently. Most modern scientists believe human behavior is a complex interaction of both. We have innate tendencies, but culture shapes how those tendencies express themselves. We're capable of cooperation and competition, altruism and selfishness, creativity and destruction. Which aspects dominate depends on the environment, the incentives, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. The Anunnaki theory is true. If we carry their genetic legacy, we might have inherited certain predispositions, but we're not locked into them. Genes influence behavior, but they don't determine it. We still have choice. The programming can be rewritten. Or can it? How much freedom do we really have? When you make a choice, when you decide to do something, where does that decision come from? Brain chemistry, neural pathways formed by previous experiences, hormones, genetic predispositions, social conditioning, subconscious drives you're not even aware of. Dissect a decision far enough and the concept of free will starts to look questionable. Maybe we're biological machines, deterministic systems running algorithms written by evolution, or by ancient genetic engineers. Our sense of agency is an illusion. We're no more free than a computer program. We just have the complexity to believe we're making choices when we're really just executing code. This is a depressing thought. And it might be true, but even if it is, even if we're determined beings following genetic and neurological programming, the experience of choice still matters. The illusion, if it is an illusion, is all we have. We can't access whatever true reality might exist beneath our subjective experience. So we work with what we've got, and what we've got is the possibility, however limited, of change, of learning, of choosing different stories to live by, of building different systems. If the Anunnaki are still here, if they're watching, if they're trying to guide or control human development, they've had limited success. Because humanity is wildly unpredictable. We do things that don't make sense from a purely rational perspective. We create art, we make music, we write poetry, we fall in love, we sacrifice ourselves for strangers. We dedicate our lives to abstract ideals like justice and beauty. These behaviors don't optimize for survival or reproduction. They don't make us better workers. They're not useful from an efficiency perspective. They're just human, gloriously, inexplicably human. If we were designed, we're badly designed. We're too emotional, too irrational, too prone to questioning authority and imagining alternatives. We break down constantly, we get sick, we age, we die far too quickly to accumulate much useful knowledge. From an engineering standpoint, we're a mess, unless the mess is the point. Unless consciousness, this strange emergent property of complex neural systems, comes with unavoidable side effects. You can't make something intelligent without making it curious. You can't make it self-aware, without making it capable of existential dread. You can't give it the ability to plan for the future without giving it the ability to imagine different futures. The Anunnaki, if they created us, might have created something they couldn't fully control. And if they're still here, they might be trying to manage a species that has exceeded its design parameters. We were supposed to be workers, but we became artists, philosophers, rebels, dreamers. We became human. Or maybe it's all a beautiful, elaborate fantasy. A modern myth for a world that feels increasingly out of control. A way to impose meaning on chaos. A cosmic drama that makes our ordinary lives feel significant. The answer, if there is one, lies somewhere in the silence between the stars, in the gaps between the clay tablets, in the space between what we know and what we believe. But before we drift into sleep, before we release these questions into the night, let's examine some of the physical traces. The fingerprints that ancient astronaut theorists claim the Anunnaki left behind. Because if advanced beings shaped human civilization, they would have left evidence, not just in texts and myths, but in stone, in structures, in artifacts that outlasted their creators. The pyramids of Giza are the obvious starting point. 3 massive stone structures on the Giza Plateau in Egypt, the largest of which, the Great Pyramid or Pyramid of Khufu, was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. Built, according to mainstream Egyptology, around 2560 BC as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu. The construction details are staggering. The Great Pyramid consists of approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. Some of the granite blocks in the king's chamber weigh up to 80 tons. The pyramid was originally 481 feet tall, with a base covering 13 acres, and it's precise. The base is level to within an inch. The sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions north, south, east, west. The deviation is less than 4 minutes of arc. How did the ancient Egyptians achieve this precision with copper tools and no modern surveying equipment? Mainstream archaeologists have proposed various methods based on experimental archaeology and analysis of construction marks. Careful surveying using the stars and simple tools like plumb bobs and set squares. Enormous earthen ramps to move the blocks into place, though the exact ramp configuration is still debated. Tens of thousands of workers organised in rotating shifts over 20 to 30 years, supported by a complex logistical system. Based on what we know of ancient Egyptian capabilities and the organisation, this is considered technically feasible, though it would have required extraordinary coordination and resources. But here's where it gets interesting. The ancient Egyptians left extensive records: hieroglyphic inscriptions, papyrus scrolls, detailed accounts of daily life, religious practices, military campaigns, agricultural production. But there are no contemporary records describing how the pyramids were built. No construction plans, no workers' accounts, no inscriptions in the pyramids themselves explaining their purpose or construction methods. The first detailed accounts of pyramid construction come from the Greek historian Herodotus, writing 2,000 years after the pyramids were built, and he admitted he was reporting second-hand stories. This absence of documentation is strange. The Egyptians documented everything else. Why not their most impressive achievement? Ancient astronaut theorists argue the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids, they inherited them. The structures were already ancient when dynastic Egypt emerged, built by a previous civilization that had access to advanced technology that might have been provided by the Anunnaki. Evidence cited includes the precision of the stonework, the way massive granite blocks fit together so tightly that you can't slip a piece of paper between them. The fact that some blocks show marks that look like they were cut with advanced tools, not copper chisels and stone hammers. The alignment of the three main pyramids with the stars of Orion's belt, suggesting sophisticated astronomical knowledge. And then there's the mathematical knowledge encoded in the pyramid's dimensions. The ratio of the pyramid's height to its base perimeter is remarkably close to the ratio of a circle's radius to its circumference. Pi. This ratio appears in the structure's proportions, coincidence, or deliberate design. Mainstream Egyptologists have explanations for all of this. The precision was achieved through skill and patience. The missing documentation might have been lost or might never have existed in the form we expect. The mathematical ratios could be coincidence, or the result of aesthetic choices that happen to align with mathematical constants. The Egyptians were brilliant. Engineers. They didn't need alien help, but doubt lingers. Because there's another mystery connected to the pyramids. The Sphinx, the Great Sphinx of Giza, carved from a single piece of limestone, depicts a lion's body with a human head. Conventional dating places it in the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, around 2500 BC, making it contemporary with the pyramids. But in the 1980s, geologist Robert Schoch proposed something controversial. He examined the weathering patterns on the Sphinx and the surrounding enclosure. The pattern he observed was, in his interpretation, more consistent with water erosion than wind and sand erosion. He noted what appeared to be vertical channels, suggesting prolonged rainfall. His controversial conclusion was that Egypt hasn't had that kind of sustained rainfall since the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. If Schoch is correct, and this remains highly disputed, the Sphinx would be far older than conventional Egyptology admits. It would predate pharaonic Egypt by thousands of years, which would suggest someone built it before the ancient Egyptians, someone we don't have clear records of. Schoch's theory remains controversial within the scientific community. Most geologists and Egyptologists dispute his interpretation, arguing the weathering could be caused by other factors, including groundwater seepage, chemical weathering processes, or even restoration work over millennia. The scholarly consensus hasn't shifted, and the conventional dating of the Sphinx to around 2500 BC remains the accepted position. But Schoch maintains his analysis, and the debate continues in some circles. If such a civilization existed, if it built the Sphinx and possibly the pyramids, who were they? One possibility is that they were human, a culture that developed advanced knowledge independently and then collapsed, leaving only scattered remnants. Another possibility is that they were the Anunnaki or were taught by the Anunnaki. Similar mysteries appear around the world. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, discovered in the 90s, consists of massive T-shaped stone pillars arranged in circles. Radiocarbon dating places construction around 9600 BC, making it older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years and older than the earliest Sumerian cities by 5,000 years. The people who built Göbekli Tepe appear to have been hunter-gatherers based on current evidence. There's little sign of agriculture or permanent settlements in the immediate area during this period, yet they organised labour to quarry, transport, carve, and erect stones weighing up to 20 tons. They created sophisticated art, depicting animals and abstract symbols. And then, around 8000 BC, archaeological evidence suggests they deliberately buried the entire site. The structures were filled in with thousands of tons of dirt, preserved but hidden. Why? Archaeologists have proposed various theories, from ritual decommissioning to protecting the site, but the answer remains elusive. If we follow the Anunnaki theory, Göbekli Tepe could be interpreted as evidence of pre-flood civilization. In this speculative framework, it might represent a site built by humans under Anunnaki guidance, then deliberately buried to preserve it when the flood was coming. A time capsule from before reset. This is, of course, pure conjecture not supported by mainstream archaeology, but it demonstrates how the theory attempts to explain archaeological mysteries. Peru offers another cluster of anomalies. The Nazca lines, enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert, depicting animals, plants and geometric shapes, some stretching over 1,000 feet. They were created by removing the reddish surface rocks to reveal lighter soil beneath. Simple in execution, but their scale makes them visible only from the air. Why create art that can only be appreciated from a perspective the creators supposedly couldn't access? Ancient astronaut theorists argue the lines were landing strips or markers for aircraft. Mainstream archaeologists suggest they were ritual pathways, astronomical calendars, or offerings to sky gods who could see them from above even if humans couldn't. And then there's Pumapunku in Bolivia, part of the larger Tiwanaku complex. Stone blocks cut with extraordinary precision. Perfect right angles, smooth surfaces. Some blocks have interlocking shapes, like three-dimensional jigsaw pieces. The precision suggests advanced tools, perhaps diamond-tipped saws and drills, but the Tiwanaku culture, which flourished around 500–900 AD, had no known metalworking technology capable of achieving this precision. Mainstream archaeology suggests stone tools and patience. Ancient astronaut theory suggests something else. Technology we don't understand, knowledge that was lost or deliberately hidden. The pattern across all these sites is similar. Precision beyond what we expect from the time period. Scale beyond what seems necessary. Knowledge of mathematics, astronomy and engineering that appears suddenly in the archaeological record without clear precursors. And then, often, abandonment, decline, the knowledge seemingly lost. If the Anunnaki never left, if they remained on Earth in hidden form, these sites could be messages, markers, proofs of their existence scattered across the globe, each one a testament to capabilities that supposedly primitive humans shouldn't have possessed. Or they're testaments to human ingenuity, to the fact that our ancestors were far more capable, far more brilliant, far more determined than we give them credit for. We look at their achievements and declare them impossible because we're judging them by our standards, our limitations. But they had their own methods, their own knowledge, their own relationship with stone and mathematics and the sky. Maybe the real mystery isn't how they built these structures, it's why we're so eager to credit anyone but them. There's a psychological component to ancient astronaut theory that deserves examination. Why do we want to believe our ancestors couldn't have achieved what they clearly did achieve? Why do we need to invoke aliens or lost civilizations or ancient technologies? Part of it is the appeal of the mysterious. A solved problem is boring. An unsolved problem is exciting. If we know exactly how the pyramids were built, they become less magical. They're just big piles of rock arranged in a specific shape. Impressive, certainly, but explainable, mundane. But if they're a mystery, if there's something about them we can't fully explain, they become doorways to something else. Proof that reality is stranger than we've been told. Evidence that our history is incomplete. A hook on which we can hang all our questions about meaning and purpose and whether we're alone in the universe. There's also an element of ego. If our ancestors built the pyramids without help, that's impressive. But if aliens built them, or if aliens taught us to build them, then we're part of a cosmic story. We're not just clever apes who figured out agriculture and architecture. We're the creations or students of starfaring civilizations. We're special, important, connected to something vast. The opposite might also be true. Maybe we diminish our ancestors because we can't fathom their capabilities. We live in an age of specialized knowledge and technological dependence. Most of us couldn't build a house with our bare hands, couldn't navigate by the stars, couldn't identify edible plants, couldn't make fire without matches. We've outsourced our basic competencies to technology and experts. So when we look at ancient peoples who possessed deep practical knowledge, who could read the landscape and the sky, who could work stone with precision using tools we'd consider primitive, we can't imagine ourselves doing it. Therefore, we assume it was impossible for them too. We need to invoke something extraordinary to explain their ordinary, if impressive, achievements. But perhaps the Anunnaki theory isn't really about the past. Perhaps it's about the present. About how we feel right now in this moment of human history. We live in a world that feels increasingly managed, surveilled, controlled. Corporations track our every purchase, our every click, building profiles more detailed than we could construct ourselves. Governments monitor communications, justify wars, make decisions that affect millions without consulting those millions. Algorithms curate the information we see, shaping our perceptions of reality in ways we don't fully understand. We sense that we're not in control, that there are forces operating beyond our visibility, beyond our influence, that no matter how we vote or what we buy or how we live, the fundamental structure of power remains unchanged. The Anunnaki theory provides a framework for this feeling. It externalizes it. The reason you feel controlled is because you are controlled. The reason the system feels rigged is because it is rigged. The reason you can't quite figure out who's in charge is because the real controllers are hidden. They're not human, or they're not fully human, or they're humans who carry non-human genetics and allegiances. It's the same psychological structure as any conspiracy. Theory. Something feels wrong. The official explanation doesn't satisfy, so we construct an alternative explanation that makes the wrongness make sense. We create a narrative in which the confusion and powerlessness we feel aren't personal failings. They're responses to actual hidden manipulation. And maybe they are. Maybe conspiracy theories are sometimes true. Maybe powerful groups do operate in secret to maintain their power. This is documented historical fact. Operation Northwoods, COINTELPRO, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, MKUltra. These aren't conspiracy theories. They are declassified conspiracies, actual secret government programs that seemed crazy when researchers first alleged them and turned out to be real. So the instinct to question official narratives isn't paranoid. It's prudent. The powerful lie. They always have. They always will. Maintaining power requires information asymmetry. They know things we don't. They make decisions in private that affect us in public. This is the nature of power. The question is where we draw the line between healthy skepticism and unfalsifiable conspiracy thinking. Between questioning authority and seeing hidden controllers everywhere. Between critical analysis and pattern-seeking run amok. With the Anunnaki theory, we're so far removed from verifiable evidence that it becomes a Rorschach test. You see what you bring to it. If you trust authority, if you're satisfied with mainstream explanations, if you believe human civilization is the product of natural social evolution, you'll see the theory as pseudoscience. Mistranslated texts, misunderstood archaeology, modern mythology dressed up as ancient history. If you distrust authority, if you feel alienated from the systems that govern your life, if you suspect there's more to reality than what you've been taught, you'll see possibility. Suppressed knowledge, evidence that's been dismissed too quickly, questions that deserve investigation. Neither perspective is objectively wrong. Both are responding to real aspects of the world. There are genuine mysteries in human history. There are also genuine explanations for many things that seem mysterious. The truth, as always, is complex, nuanced, unsatisfying to those who want clean answers. The Anunnaki might be real in some form we haven't conceptualized yet. Advanced beings from our own prehistory, time travelers from our own future, interdimensional entities that don't fit our categories of existence, collective hallucinations or projections of the human unconscious that have their own reality in the realm of consciousness, metaphors that contain literal truths in ways language can't quite capture, or they might be exactly what mainstream scholarship says they are: gods, deities imagined by ancient peoples to explain their world, literary characters in mythological texts that were never meant to be read as history, personifications of natural forces and social structures, given narrative form. Both can be true simultaneously depending on what level of analysis you're operating on. The gods are myths. The myths encode truths. The truths are both historical and psychological. The psychological truths affect material reality through human behavior. Material reality shapes psychology through experience. It's circular. It's complex. It resists simple explanation. And that's okay. That's maybe even the point. Not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be lived with, contemplated, allowed to exist in their ambiguity. The Anunnaki ask us questions about our origins, our nature, our purpose, our freedom. They ask whether we're alone, whether we're controlled, whether our history is our own. These are good questions, essential questions. The fact that we can't answer them definitively doesn't diminish their importance. Maybe the Anunnaki never left because they were never here in the way we imagine. They exist as questions, as possibilities, as the gap between what we know and what we wonder. They're the uncertainty we feel when we look at ancient ruins and realize we don't fully understand the people who built them. They're the unease we feel when we notice patterns in history that seem too consistent to be random. They're the longing we feel when we look at the stars and wish we weren't alone. They're us, reflected in the mirror of our own myths, asking ourselves who we are, why we're here, where we're going, and whether anyone's watching. And for now, for tonight, as sleep begins to pull you under, that's enough. The question doesn't need an answer. Not every mystery needs to be solved. Sometimes the wondering is the point. But before we let go completely, before we release this into the realm of dreams, let's consider one final possibility. One that brings the ancient theory into our present moment. What if the Anunnaki aren't just a historical question? What if they're a contemporary one? Throughout this journey we've focused on the past, on Sumer and clay, tablets and ancient myths, on the possibility that beings came thousands of years ago and never left. But if that's true, they're not just historical entities. They're here now, in our world, affecting our present. So what would that look like? How would we know? There's a growing phenomenon in modern culture. People reporting experiences that don't fit conventional categories. Close encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena. Contact experiences with non-human intelligence. Encounters with beings who seem to know things about human history that aren't in any textbook. The UFO phenomenon has moved from fringe conspiracy to mainstream discussion. In 2020, the Pentagon officially released videos recorded by Navy pilots showing objects performing unusual aerial maneuvers. The Pentagon confirmed the videos were genuine footage captured by military sensors and that the objects were unidentified. They carefully noted this doesn't mean extraterrestrial, simply that they couldn't determine what the objects were with available information. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena, documenting 44 encounters reported by military aviators between 2004 and 2021. The report concluded they could explain only one sighting with high confidence. For the rest, they lacked sufficient data to determine the nature of the phenomena. The report considered various possible explanations, from foreign adversary technology to airborne clutter, but couldn't definitively categorize most incidents. This is significant, because for decades the official position was that UFOs weren't real. They were mistakes, hoaxes, weather balloons, secret military craft, but definitely not worth taking seriously. That position has shifted. Now the acknowledgement is that something is happening. Something real, something we don't understand. If the Anunnaki never left, if they've been here all along, these sightings might, in this theoretical framework, not be alien visitors arriving. They could represent the permanent residents occasionally becoming visible. Whether intentionally or accidentally, we simply don't know. This is, of course, highly speculative. Some contactees, people who claim direct communication with non-human intelligence, report messages that sound eerily similar to ancient creation myths. They're told that humanity was created or modified by advanced beings, that we're part of an experiment or a project, that our creators are still monitoring us, waiting to see if we'll evolve beyond our violent, self-destructive tendencies. These accounts are anecdotal, impossible to verify, and could easily be psychological phenomena rather than literal contact. The human mind is capable of generating incredibly vivid experiences that feel completely real but originate internally. Hallucinations. Dissociative. states, false memories. The brain is a storytelling machine, and sometimes the stories feel like external events when they're actually internal processes. But what if some of these experiences are genuine contact? What if there are beings, whether Anunnaki or something else, who occasionally communicate with humans? What would they say? If they created us as workers and we've evolved beyond that role, they might be concerned. Humanity now has technology capable of destroying the planet. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons, climate-altering industrial processes. We're powerful enough to be dangerous to ourselves and potentially to them. From their perspective, we might be a failed experiment. Created to be controlled workers, we became unpredictable, creative, rebellious. We developed our own technologies. We're on the verge of spreading beyond Earth, of becoming a spacefaring species. We might soon be their competitors, not their servants. So what would they do? Intervention seems risky. Direct contact might provoke panic, war, collapse. Better to influence subtly, through select individuals, through institutions, through carefully managed information release. Or perhaps they're divided among themselves, as the ancient texts suggest. One faction wanting to help humanity evolve, another wanting to constrain or eliminate us. The UFO phenomenon, with its mix of seemingly beneficial and threatening encounters, might reflect this division. Different groups with different agendas, all operating on or around Earth, all affecting humanity in different ways. This brings us into truly speculative territory. But speculation is all we have when dealing with possibilities this strange. The framework of conventional science and history doesn't leave room for hidden gods or secret space programs or ancient genetic experiments. So if any of this is real, it exists in the spaces between what we can prove, in the anomalies, the unexplained encounters, the persistent, myths that refuse to fade. There's another modern development worth considering: transhumanism. The movement advocating for the use of technology to enhance human capabilities beyond natural limits, genetic engineering, neural implants, life extension, artificial intelligence augmentation, the merger of human and machine. If we follow the Anunnaki narrative, this isn't a new idea, it's a very old one. The Anunnaki allegedly created us through genetic engineering, enhancing primitive hominids with their own DNA. We're already transhuman in that sense, already the product of biological enhancement. Now we're taking control of the process ourselves, engineering our own evolution. Is this liberation? Taking control of our own development from creators who might still be trying to manage us? Or is it falling into a trap? Becoming dependent on technologies that will ultimately be controlled by small groups, creating new hierarchies and new forms of slavery? The answers depend on who controls the technology and to what ends. Technology itself is neutral. It's a tool. But tools are used by people with intentions, and those intentions matter enormously. If the Anunnaki exist, if they are watching our technological development, they might see it as threatening or as promising. We're becoming more like them, more capable, more powerful, less controllable. That could be exactly what Enki intended when he created us, or exactly what Enlil feared. The modern world is strange in ways our ancestors couldn't have predicted. We have global communication networks, surveillance systems, the ability to modify genetics, artificial intelligence that's beginning to match or exceed human capabilities in specific domains. We're creating things that might outlive us, might replace us, might fundamentally alter what it means to be human. If the Anunnaki are real and they're observing this, what do they think? Are we fulfilling our potential or confirming their worst fears? Are we proving that giving primitive beings intelligence was a terrible mistake, or are we demonstrating exactly why it was worth doing? We don't know. We can't know because the Anunnaki, if they exist, aren't talking. Not clearly. Not in ways we can verify. We're left to interpret scattered myths, ambiguous encounters, and the strange trajectory of our own history. But here's what we do know. Human beings are remarkable. We're flawed, certainly. Violent, short-sighted, tribal. We do terrible things to each other and to the world we live in. But we're also capable of extraordinary beauty, compassion, creativity, sacrifice. We create art that serves no survival function. We dedicate our lives to understanding the universe through science. We care for our sick and elderly. We build institutions, however imperfect, aimed at justice and cooperation. If we were designed to be slaves, we're terrible at it. We're far too curious, too rebellious, too idealistic. We keep imagining better worlds and trying to build them, even though we keep failing and having to try again. If we evolved naturally, we're strange outcomes of that process. Most of our behaviours don't optimise for genetic fitness. We adopt children who aren't biologically ours. We choose not to reproduce at all. We create rather than simply consume. We contemplate rather than simply act. We don't quite fit the boxes that either explanation designed or evolved would predict. We're anomalies, in-between beings, conscious of our mortality but capable of imagining immortality, bound to Earth but dreaming of the stars, finite creatures asking infinite questions. Maybe that's what makes us interesting. Not to hidden gods or alien observers, but to ourselves. We're the universe become aware of itself, carbon and water arranged in such a way that it can wonder about its own origins. That's remarkable whether or not anyone's watching. The Anunnaki theory, like all creation myths, is ultimately about meaning. We want to know why we're here, what our purpose is, whether our existence matters to anyone beyond ourselves. The theory offers an answer. We were created for a specific purpose by specific beings who might still care about their creation. But we don't need that answer to matter. We can create our own meaning, define our own purpose, decide for ourselves what kind of beings we want to be, and what kind of world we want to build. If the Anunnaki never left, if they're still here watching, they're seeing a species in transition, struggling to grow beyond its programming, whether that programming is genetic or cultural or both, trying to become something more than what we were designed or evolved to be. And that struggle is beautiful, the outcome uncertain, the ending unwritten. We're authoring our own story now, for better or worse. We're taking responsibility for our own development, our own future, our own meaning. The gods, if they exist, might approve, or they might be horrified, or they might be indifferent, having moved on to other projects, other creations, other worlds. Either way, we're here, conscious, questioning, creating. And that has to be enough, because it's all we have. This moment, this breath, this strange existence as self-aware beings on a small planet orbiting an ordinary star in an incomprehensibly vast universe. Whether we're alone or watched over, designed or accidental, controlled or free, the experience is the same. We're alive, we're aware, and we're wondering about it all. That's the real mystery. Not who the Anunnaki were or whether they're still here, but what consciousness is. What it means to be a being that can ask these questions. What it means to exist in this strange state of awareness, knowing we'll die, knowing we're finite yet capable of imagining infinity. The Anunnaki, real or imagined, are a mirror. We see our own questions reflected in them, our own uncertainties about origins and purpose, and control, our own hopes that we're special, part of something bigger, connected to cosmic intelligence, our own fears that we're alone, accidents, insignificant. Both might be true. We might be cosmically insignificant and personally meaningful simultaneously, small on the scale of the universe, precious on the scale of individual experience, created or evolved or some complex combination of both, free within constraints, determined yet choosing. The paradoxes don't resolve, they coexist. And learning to hold paradox, to live with uncertainty, to embrace mystery rather than demanding answers, might be the most important skill consciousness can develop. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, as these questions dissolve into dreams, let them go without needing resolution. The Anunnaki can remain in the realm of possibility, never quite real, never quite imagined, always hovering in that liminal space between history and myth, fact and fiction, ancient past and eternal present. They're there if you need them. A framework for thinking about power and origins and hidden influences. A story that makes sense of the strangeness of human history. A question mark hovering over our civilization, suggesting there's more to the story than we've been told, and they're not there if you don't need them. A fascinating example of how modern minds reinterpret ancient myths. A case study in pattern seeking and conspiracy thinking. A reminder that human history is complex enough, mysterious enough, without needing to invoke ancient astronauts. Both perspectives valid, both useful in different ways, both part of how we make sense of this strange existence. The clay tablets will still be in their museums tomorrow. The academic debates will continue. New translations will be published. New archaeological discoveries will be made. The questions will persist because they're good questions, worth asking, worth wrestling with. But for now, for this moment, let them rest. Let their Anunnaki, real or imagined, historical or mythical, present or absent, fade into the background. Let the theories and the evidence and the interpretations all blur together into a soft hum of possibility. What matters right now is this. You're here, in this moment, connected to an unbroken chain of human consciousness stretching back thousands of years. Your ancestors, whoever they were, however they came to be, looked up at the same stars you see, wondered the same questions, felt the same mix of awe and confusion and hope and fear. You're part of that continuity, that great human project of trying to understand, of building civilizations and seeing them fall, of creating beauty and knowledge and meaning in a universe that might not provide any of those things on its own. Whether the Anunnaki are watching or not, whether they care or not, whether they exist or not, you're still here. Still part of the story, still asking questions, still creating pure meaning through the simple act of being conscious, being curious, being human. And that perhaps is enough. The Weld-Blundell Prism sits in its climate-controlled case in Oxford. The cuneiform symbols remain. The kings who ruled for 40 through 200 years are still listed there, recorded with the same precision as kings who ruled for 9 years. The scribes who carved those symbols into wet clay believed they were telling the truth, recording history, preserving something important. What they preserved was this, the sense that our past is stranger than we've been told, that the stories our ancestors left us might contain truths we've forgotten how to see, that the questions about where we came from, why we're here, and whether we're alone are worth asking, even if we never find satisfying answers. The night is deep now, the questions are settling like dust, your breathing has slowed, the boundary between thought and dream is dissolving. Let the mystery remain a mystery. Let the Anunnaki, real or imagined, keep their secrets. Let the ancient cities of Sumer sleep beneath the Iraqi sand. Let the clay tablets hold their ambiguous truths. You don't need to solve this tonight. You don't need to know whether gods or aliens or our own forgotten ancestors shaped the world we inherited. All you need to know is that the questions are beautiful. The wondering is enough. Human history is vast and strange and full of shadows. We stand at the end of a long chain of generations, each one asking the same questions, each one finding different answers, each one leaving mysteries for the next. Maybe the Anunnaki are still here. Maybe they never left. Maybe they're us. Maybe we carry their legacy in our DNA, in our institutions, in our collective memory of beings who came from the sky and taught us how to be civilized. Or maybe we built this world ourselves, and the gods we imagine are just reflections of our own potential. The wisdom of Enki, the authority of Enlil, the creative power of the Mother Goddess. All of it, human, all of it ours. Either way, here we are, inheritors of an ancient mystery, children of the stars or children of the earth, created or evolved, alone or watched over. The answer changes nothing about this moment. The soft darkness, the quiet breath, the gentle drift towards sleep. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you for your time, for your curiosity, for your willingness to wonder. If this story touched something in you, A-Like helps it find others who might need these questions tonight. More mysteries await in the playlist whenever you're ready to return, and I'm always curious. What do you think? Are they still here? Leave your thoughts in the comments, but only if you want to, only if the thought lingers after the sleep has come and gone. Until next time, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is as you listen to this, sleep well, dream deep, and remember that some questions are more valuable than their answers.